There are some questions that have been dragging us along since the beginning of humanity. Where did we come from? What is the purpose of our existence? Does it have a purpose? What happens after death? Etc. But perhaps at the root of all these questions lies a more fundamental curiosity. Why does one need to believe? Why do we turn to an unseen force to explain our existence? Is it evolution that shapes us, or is it our beliefs that make us who we are? Perhaps belief is an illusion presented to us by nature, a complex game of our brain. Or maybe the opposite is true. The brain is the only entity in the universe that can carry belief. In this video, I invite you to a deeper journey, not an ordinary religious discussion. By removing God from a concept, a doctrine, a figure, we will consider it as a biological function, a neurological necessity, an evolutionary strategy. If you are ready, let's ask the question out loud together. Is belief the inevitable fate of our brain? Let's look for the answer to this question together. What do you think was cooking in the oldest fires in human history? Was it the animals he hunted, or was that primitive man cooking his search for meaning? Weren't the figures drawn on the cave walls just hunting scenes, but also the expression of some kind of inner voice? Those early Homo sapiens who were afraid when thunder roared and thought the apocalypse was coming when the sun eclipsed, he could only alleviate his helplessness in the face of nature by believing in a power. Some people imagined a being in the upper heavens. Some believed that the spirits of their ancestors were watching over them, because it was hard to live with the unknown. Like death, like lightning, like an earthquake. And it is at this point that faith ceases to be just an idea. It has become a reflex, a need, perhaps a safety mechanism of the brain. And then some scientists came back to this point and started asking this question: is what we call belief an internal product of the brain? Could believing in God be one of our brain's strategies to keep us alive? Modern neuroscience has looked for traces of religious and mystical experiences in specific areas of the brain. It has been shown that a burst of electrical activity in the temporal lobe can enable a person to hear the voice of God. It has become commonplace for some epilepsy patients to claim that they have spoken to a divine being during a seizure. Based on this data, names like Matthew Alper, the brain may have evolved to produce God, he said. This, he claimed, was a neurological solution to the suppression of the fear of death. Because the human mind could not handle infinity, the existence of an end would drive him to the edge of madness. Therefore, in order to protect itself, the brain had to imagine eternity and construct an afterlife. But does this idea explain everything? Or should it be explained? For someone who has had a religious experience, isn't the sense of peace and security felt at that moment real? Could it be that what the electrical currents in the brain do is merely the external reflection of an internal reality? Just like dreams. Dreams can also be explained neurologically, but does that prevent us from ignoring the feeling the dream leaves us with? This is where philosophy comes into play. As Epictetus said, it is not things that disturb people, but their beliefs about things. Maybe what we call God is exactly that belief, and this belief allows one to hold on not only to the extraordinary, but also to oneself. Today, we can scan the brain with the possibilities of modern science. We can measure which regions are activated during belief and how much dopamine is released. But there is still a question that we cannot fully answer. Does the brain produce belief, or does belief shape the brain? This is the border. Science follows the traces of faith, and faith fills in the gaps that science cannot see. Some see this as a weakness, others as a miracle. But what is undeniable is that the human brain is not only a thinking organ, but also a mechanism that searches for meaning. And sometimes it is in an invisible place that it finds this meaning. Today, the relationship between faith and the brain is no longer just a subject for philosophers, theologians, or psychologists. It has now moved directly into the lab, into magnetic resonance imaging devices. Since the beginning of the 21st century, scientists have begun to observe the brains of people who pray, meditate, and engage in religious meditation. The interesting thing is that in faith-related experiences, the same areas of the brain are always activated, specifically the temporal lobe, limbic system, and certain parts of the prefrontal cortex. These regions also govern the mechanisms of meaning, fear, trust, and reward. So when a person prays, he is not just establishing a spiritual connection. Feelings of security, belonging, and peace are also physically triggered in the brain. Chemicals such as dopamine and serotonin released during religious practices. It actually causes one to experience a sense of relief, even a kind of euphoria. So what does this mean? According to some scientists, this is a natural part of the brain's capacity to produce meaning. For some, this is neurological evidence that the brain is designed to communicate with God. Research is not limited to individual experiences. Anthropology also contributes to this issue. It is remarkable that some kind of belief system has emerged in every era and on every continent. The languages are different, the mythologies are different, the symbols are different. But the basic structures are always similar. A creator, an order, a sense of morality, a belief in life after death. Is this similarity a coincidence, or is it a sign of a common biological infrastructure? Some say that this universality shows that the brain has a structured belief circuit, but on the other side there is this question. The fact that it is universal means that it is natural, but does that mean that it is not real? Just like hunger and thirst, human nature may require a God. But is this need a sign for or against the existence of God? Science cannot provide a single answer to all of these questions, because the task of science is not to produce meaning. To answer the question, how? Solving the question of what is happening. But questions like why it happens or whether it should happen still remain in the realm of philosophy and belief. This is where the complexity of the human mind comes to light once again, because humans are not only creatures that analyze, but also creatures that feel, fear, and hope. Therefore, seeing faith as merely a biological reflection would belittle it. But simply seeing it as a sacred reality may not be enough. Perhaps the best approach is to look from both windows simultaneously. Why would a person want to believe? Is it just because he is afraid? Does he cling to the idea of God because of his deep anxiety about death, loneliness, and nothingness? Maybe. But to simplify things this much would be to see faith as an ordinary emotional shelter. However, faith arises not only from fear but also sometimes from admiration, the wonder we feel at the beauty we see, the first breath of a child, the awe we feel at the infinity of the universe. All of these can direct the human mind to the idea of a creator, because some questions have no answers. Some emotions also have limits. And in that immensity, the human mind sometimes produces a meaning, a name, a prayer. He calls it God. He calls it meaning. He calls it the soul of the universe. But they all arise from the same place, from a need to fill a void. In the modern age, this gap has perhaps become even wider. As traditional belief systems weaken, people continue their search for meaning in other ways. Some in science, some in art, some in ideologies. Although these are areas that seem to be the opposite of faith, they actually fill a similar void. And ultimately, the same question echoes everywhere. Why am I here? In the past, the answer to this question had a clear name: destiny, creation, a sacred purpose. Today, these answers have been replaced by more vague concepts: coincidence, causality. Science can explain how humans came into being, but we still don't know why it occurs. This is where faith comes into play. It is not important whether something is real or not, but how it makes us feel. Because man lives not only with knowledge, but also with feeling. At this point, we need to ask this: if a person completely abandons faith, what does he replace it with? Are there new systems that will fill the existential void? Technology, artificial intelligence, social media, science, or is it just silence? There is no definitive answer to any of these questions. But this much is clear: the human mind is not suited to living in a vacuum. Just as ancient philosophers said, nature abhors a vacuum. Perhaps that's why faith sprouts in a vacuum. And so the brain is not just thinking, it's also searching for meaning. The brain works with cause and effect relationships, but it also seeks purpose. That sense of purpose is sometimes embodied in a creator, sometimes in an ideology, sometimes simply in the smile of a child. The data provided by modern science has only made this process more visible. We now know much more about what the brain does, but we still don't know exactly why the brain works this way, just like the idea of God. We may know where it originates in our brain, but we still can't figure out why it's there. That's why faith begins to speak while science remains silent. More accurately, in my opinion, both are speaking at the same time, but we choose to listen to only one. This stems from the illusion of choosing between science and faith. When the human mind asks a question, it is doomed to be dragged behind that question. And there are some questions that we can't stop asking, even if we can't find answers to them. The question of God is such a question. Maybe that's why the brain reproduces it endlessly, in every era, in every culture, with different names, different symbols, but always on the same axis. Sometimes as a father figure in the sky, sometimes as nature itself, sometimes as the voice of conscience within us. Because even though people look for meaning outside, they actually want to hear an internal echo. The name of that echo is faith. Our brains may have evolved to hear this echo. Or maybe this echo actually exists, and the brain is just an antenna that can detect it. As we oscillate between these two possibilities, we can never be completely sure of either. But we still hear that echo. For some, this is an illusion. For some, it is an absolute truth. When a person feels the divine, he sometimes escapes loneliness, sometimes finds hope in despair. Sometimes he thinks that it opens the door to meaning. The brain may have started this as a chemical process or developed it as an evolutionary strategy. But for whatever reason, this process directs people's lives. It is the expression of the amazement in the face of existence and the surrender in the face of the unknown. It can neither be explained entirely by science, nor can it be limited to faith alone. Whether it is a product of the mind or a reality that transcends the mind, we will perhaps never know. But our search will be the very thing that makes it meaningful. And as long as this search continues, the human brain will always ask that question again. Why do I want to believe? On the other hand, some may say with clear determination, I don't want to believe, I want to know. It means to know, to measure, to observe, to prove. It is the safest haven for a mind intolerant of uncertainty. But here we need to ask this: can everything be known? Is reality only what can be measured? Or let's ask it this way: is knowing always enough? Does knowing the internal structure of a star diminish the feeling it creates in the night sky? Does knowing the hormonal processes of love slow down the heart rate? The human mind is insatiable with knowledge, because it requires not only knowledge but also meaning. Therefore, belief can be a complementary dimension to knowledge, not an alternative. While science seeks to ask how, faith asks why. One figures out the mechanism, the other seeks the purpose. And perhaps what makes a person human is the ability to carry both within themselves, sometimes as a knowing being, sometimes as someone who just feels. We do not have to choose between believing and knowing, because perhaps the deepest truth is hidden where these two paths intersect.